So my co-host today is Sally Ann Burris, who runs the website Split the Difference. She's a member of Gender Parity UK, and my interview with her will be published at 10 a.m. tomorrow, followed by her Q&A. So I hope you can come to that. Our interviewee today surely needs no introduction to anybody who's familiar with the struggles of men, to see their children and vice versa. Certainly the most qualified person I've ever come across in the area, and he's made some memorable presentations to various conferences over the years. So a very warm welcome, Vincent, and perhaps you'd like to say a few words for yourself. Now, 55 seconds, don't forget.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for once again giving me a platform to speak from, and welcome, Sally. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Vincent McGovern. I'm the author of the book, The War on Dads and Children, and that's about the systemic malpractice in children's agencies. And on my journey through that, I've obtained 5 ombudsman's investigations, 3 of which were parliamentary. 2 of those parliamentary ombudsman's investigations were into CAFCAS, Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service. I've joked term at times. And I have also presented a European Parliament Petitions Commission on its motion Systemic Failings UK Family Courts, which led to a brief investigation, a touchlight investigation into failing services in the UK, children's services. And I'm also a volunteer for 2 branches. I'm chair of 2 branches of shared parent charity, Family State Fathers, centred in North London, but I'm here in a private capacity, not as a representative of the charity. So I have far too much experience over the last 14 years of the astonishing malpractice at all levels of the system. It is not entirely corrupt, it is just 90% corrupt, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Vincent. So Sally, do you want to kick off the questions?
Okay, I am so happy to be here today with you 2 gentlemen, I really am. So the first question is of Douglas, and he says, since there is such an advantage in making a claim of domestic abuse, why are men not getting in first with a claim?
Well, it's very simple. It is designed to not allow men in to make the claim. Women's Aid has coordinated that very well because they have a stranglehold on local domestic violence service provision in virtually every borough in the country. And the domestic violence agencies are the gateway agencies post 2013 last for legal aid, sentencing and punishment of offenders. So it is not possible to get in and make a complaint when the gate is barred to you. It's very simple. And incidentally, many people at the meetings ask us about this, and they complain about their civic rights and their human rights not being adhered to. You must understand that in this business, fathers have no rights. And to educate you on that further, Section 2, subsection 4 of the Children Act 1989, I quote, not quite verbatim, but in effect, for the avoidance of doubt, the father is no longer the legal guardian of his children. Neither is the mother technically, but in implementation and interpretation of the vast increase in domestic violence agencies and the control of the local services, which are the gateway to the family courts, you are barred by gender. It's very simple. It's totally wrong as well.
This brings us on to Douglas's second question. Many of the committees that determine procedures and adjust the guidelines are available to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Do you encourage men's advocates to keep their eye out for these committees and do what they can to get themselves on them?
I am on a few of those committees myself. And yes, I do encourage men's advocates, but you have to understand that if you're a man on one of those panels, the best example I can think of where you're going to be is the brilliant Mel Brooks classic Western Blazing Saddles, where the black man, dressed as a Ku Klux Klan member, had to sign his name, and of course his black hand was exposed, and he suddenly had to flee for his life. You will at best be ignored, ostracized, or patronized. You will very seldom get opposition against you because they control the funding and the narrative behind the scene. And you won't be taking the notes or the minutes. So I agree entirely with getting on these panels, but that is the obstacles you are facing.
So Steve has asked a question, and he says, Warren Farrell and myself though not Mike, think that within the next decade, the whole misandrist obscenity will begin to dissolve. When do you think this might be the case re the family court system? There's two questions there. That one.
I'm afraid I don't share the optimism that it will dissolve, because that assumes that the searchlight of proper public behaviour and the disinfectant of administrative procedures being properly followed is going to come in. It won't. We're at a different phase in history than ever before. And this fourth wave version of feminism, which I look upon as a complete corruption of what feminism is meant to be about, it is only purely interested in gender supremacy. And it sees that the only parents of the children should be the mother and daddy state. And with such a huge opposition against it. I mean, for example, the Berlin Wall existed from 1946-47 to 1989. Catholic Church existed for centuries. So why should we believe it's going to dissolve in a short space of time? I wish it would dissolve within months, but I do not see that it's likely to dissolve. Quite the opposite. I see it getting much stronger, particularly since 2013 and the revisions of LASPO in 2016.
I wonder if you might ask one of your own questions, Sally. I would encourage people here to post some more questions in the Q&A. I know we have one or two.
Okay, so one of my questions was, how as a man do you package all that you've done and drive that forward?
I have a simple philosophy. I look upon the gateway agencies and the institutional malpractice, which is broadly government funded, local and national, as being like a large castle. And I am the little hillbilly out in the woods trying to get into that castle and make him do his job on a gender neutral and partial professionalism. So the way I've gone about it is what I call trap and whack. Others might have a better description. I attack the castle head on. They come out to attack me. I disappear. I pick up some material that's left behind and I attack again. Because my ambition is to get to the keep, to the center of the castle, that I'm inside. And they then have to move away from what I call child endangered gender discrimination to gender neutral and partial professionalism. It's a risky strategy, but it's worked for me. But everybody has to bring what they can. What works for me may not work for someone else because of different circumstances, different entry to it.
Steve asked a supplementary question, Vincent. You said in your interview the way forward is to attack the entry organisations, re the family court system. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, they control, particularly in the poorer areas, because this is a war on poverty. It's a war on poor people, well, particularly on poor fathers who haven't got the means, the financial means, the wherewithal to be able to deal with this avalanche. And in this current system, the average man believes that if he goes to court to try and see his children, it's a fair battle between him and the mother. It is absolutely not. It is a battle between him and the mother backed by the agencies of state with huge funding. And he's got his bit of pocket money, basically, half of them that work in the gig economy, what have you. So he has to realize that he is a total outsider. But there is one huge topic that not enough men, in my opinion, are grabbing hold of, which is the welfare of the child, the welfare checklist. That is the vehicle. That is how the family court has been designed. I entirely agree with the welfare of the child being the paramount principle. I entirely disagree with the subversion and the perversion of it. So that is what has to be attacked, the perversion of that aim, the subversion of it by all these agencies. And when you're dealing with people who are total bigotry, you will never change their mindset. But their funding, their positions of power, that has to be removed so that they are not the controlling agency in this anymore.
Sally?
Okay, we have Douglas, and he's asked, one thing I learned from Andrew Payne was from his description of how awful it is to be a victim of DV, being questioned by his abuser. How can we avoid abusing victims in court while protecting the innocently accused?
That can never happen, and it's gone increasingly more skewed in the family courts. In that, since when was it? I think it was 2013. The alleged abused cannot be questioned by the alleged abuser. I consider that a complete nonsense, because the abuser or the abused should only be determined after proper finding, due judicial process, not by glorified kangaroo courts. And if we believe that everyone is equal, you should be capable of defending yourself on the stand, and the person making the accusation should be capable of asking the questions in a relevant manner. The real disaster is, of course, in the family court system in the UK, which is quite unique. You have an adversarial system, which is an absolute disaster, because it's equivalent of the fire brigade bringing a petrol tanker to a house fire. It's the worst thing possible. It desperately needs to be converted to an inquisitorial system, as they have in so many of the continental countries, with far better outcomes for children, and both parents as well, and society at large. But unfortunately in the UK, there is a system where the welfare of the child is effectively the welfare of the professionals at the expense of the child, by having the parents going into legalized cage fighting, which is a disaster. So that whole concept of adversarial process, where one parent has the child, the other parent isn't allowed to see the child, and you're in this total unbalanced environment, it's horrendous. And a lot of that could be removed by an inquisitorial system, far less court action as they have in many other countries. Finland is only 2% of family proceedings end up in court, and far better outcomes for children. So that's where it has to be brought to, away from the adversarial and the benefit of the lawyers and the myriad professionals, and I say that with a small p, controlling the gateway agencies. They need to be removed.
I'd like just quickly to recommend your book, Vincent, to everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
The perfect Christmas present for friends, family, and feminists. I always say the three Fs. One of the things that people have, you know, you're very well known for running is it the Central London branch?
Central and North London. Yeah. Central London is the biggest one.
And people are often quite surprised. You know, men come for the first time in the most awful circumstances.
Yeah.
And you're fairly blunt with them, aren't you? I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, I'm not so blunt with the newcomers, because they're in deep shock. I will be a lot more patient with them than I will be with the repeat guys, the few repeats we have, because they're in deep pain. Most of them are kicked out of the family home. I've been there myself. Your intellect is greatly reduced. You're in shock. You possibly may not be eating very well, may not be sleeping very well. But it's an absolute disaster for them to believe that they have rights, and by demanding these rights be adhered to, that they will get a result. That is completely the wrong road, and it's an absolute gift to the opposition. The opposition being the system, and 95% of the time the mother trying to stop the father seeing their children, because she wants the children to only love her. It's too often the case here. So the quicker they get away from this delusion that they have rights, and onto the wheel that exists, which is the welfare of the child, the better for them. Because otherwise all they're doing is wallowing in self-pity. Well, that's easily done. And I always say in the housekeeping, when I'm chairing the meetings, and there's a panel of us that chair the meetings, but I'm usually the introductory one, that we are a shared parenting charity. We're not, speaking of private capacity here, we're not a men's rights group, and we're not a whinge and complain group. And many men can't adjust to that, you see, because they deeply, as I could have difficulty myself, we deeply believe we have rights. You're innocent until proved guilty. They have to understand that guilt is determined by gender. You're the wrong gender. So once you understand the different railroad you're on, then you have to learn how to work with that. And it's a horrible system, but you have far more chance in front of a judge than you have in front of the local domestic violence agencies, or the approach networks, so mind them, into the courts. So you have to be cruel to be kind sometimes. And generally speaking, only a few of them really object to this, because they don't want to accept that they have no rights. They simply cannot understand that they have no rights. That's the biggest obstacle for so many. And of course, if you go on the websites, it will all talk wonderfully about the rights of the parents and equal opportunity and all the rest. That's just a convenience for them to disguise huge institutional malpractice.
I remember saying to a campaigner in this area, gosh, it must be 10 years ago, about the family court system being broken. And he said, on the contrary, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do.
Unfortunately, sadly, sickeningly, I have to agree with you there. It's gone worse with austerity and reforms in the pension laws that meant a lot of judges have dropped down. But the amount of what I call gender vigilantes controlling the approaches to the family court is now dominant. They dominate the proceedings entirely. And sadly, this works worse in the poorer boroughs, the poorer areas, because the better off families, these agencies don't get near as much involved, because these people can afford political representation. They can afford legal representation. 80% of the people who come to the meetings, and we used to be pre-COVID dealing with 900 attendees per year, 80% of them having a hope of being able to afford legal representation. But the mother can get her by going to the local agencies and claiming to be a victim of domestic abuse, which is so broad you can't not be guilty of it as a man. And so he straight away is up against the state in that. And a quarter, 1/3 of the people in London who come to us are from English is not the first language. It's not mine either, but I half stutter it. So they have no chance at all, you see, because they're going to be accused of honor-based violence and everything else. And it's the most crudest form of stereotype imaginable. And they have, the people who deal best with this actually are the slightly older fathers from Eastern Europe, because they understand an official system and an actual system, you see. They grew up with this imbalance. They can understand, they get it. Funny enough, ex-squaddies get it as well. Yeah, they're used to getting dumped on, but they have the discipline to survive. But for a huge amount of fathers, she's been kicked out of the family home quite often, ex-parte, and totally spurious allegations that they haven't even seen. And when they do get to see the allegations, all they want to do is contest the injunction against them, which is obtained on nearly all is totally false or grossly exaggerated evidence. But by contesting that, they're not in the case fighting for their children, you see. They're on the wrong battleground. They're on the battleground that's been chosen for them. But they need to learn how to pick their battleground, despite being so disadvantaged by kicked out of the family home, etc. Maybe your computer and all the rest confiscated and you're not allowed to have it. A lot of men work from home, for example, computers, what have you. And suddenly they're denied access to all of this. So they're totally bereft. They are cast out. So it's very difficult to get them to understand where they are and to enable them to fight. But fortunately, 15–20% do. But it's a high failure rate, sadly.
We have another question from Douglas Wallace, who is giving a presentation later this week. I'm very much looking forward to that, on the United Nations. Douglas writes this: the problem of determining the criminal question of domestic violence is that a criminal case can take years to come to court, while there's a need to make a much earlier decision for the family or for the sake of for the safety of the child. Family court procedures might soon, in brackets, a glacial soon, be able to hold criminal trials on pertinent matters. Is this going to help or hinder those accused of domestic abuse?
Well, all you do for that is look at the case of the former member of Parliament, Andrew Griffiths, in, where is it, somewhere in the Midlands, North Leicester or somewhere up there, where he's been accused of multiple rape over many years and all the rest. Now, he obviously is a bit of a failing as a man, as a father, because you repeatedly sexing a few voluptuous local ladies. I've seen pictures of them. So there's a little bit of to and fro in there. But he now has an accusation against them in a 13-year relationship until he applied to see his child. And suddenly, avalanche came down on top of him. And on the balance of probabilities, which was 50.1 to 49.9%. And nearly all his women are more convincing in court than a man is. It's just an inherent advantage women have at being believed because of, well, it's nature and culture, which has been perverted nowadays. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're accused of criminal acts, that should only be in a criminal court, only. If you're accused, otherwise, it should just be, what's the situation, what's the logistics on the ground, and how can we move forward to shared parenting of this child? Because the bottom line with toxic parents is that the one with control will do anything to stop the other parent being loved. It's a need among them to only they can be loved. They have to be dominant totally in that child's life. And this is the serious problem. 2% of all the cases the family courts take up most of the time. But unfortunately, they're heavily government subsidized. And my bet nor is this: there is a serious lack of opposition from shared parenting organizations and fathers groups about this. And this is the real battleground moving on. The vast majority of these cases should never see a criminal court because there's no criminal action, no cautions, charges, or convictions. Just wild accusations once the family court proceedings start. how coincidental and how beneficial.
I'd just like to raise, like, it flows quite naturally from that, I think, the issue that more children are harmed and killed by their mothers than their fathers.
Yes, well known.
And yet the precautionary principle is very gendered, isn't it? It's always
Totally. Yes.
Philip Davis told me when he was on the Justice Select Committee many years ago now, 8 or 9 years ago, he asked if he could sit in on a family courts session and got some dispensation to do it.
Yeah.
Over lunch, he said to the judge, you know, I simply do not believe that what that woman is claiming is happening.
Yes.
How are you going to rule? He said, well, I'm going to stop the father getting access to the children, because even if there's a 1 in 1,000 chance,
that's right,
that I allow him access and he harms or kills the child, that's my career over, or at least you know, it'll be very difficult. So that's what's driving so much of this, isn't it?
That is a major factor. And then you see, you have a huge amount of people who devise this system, who devise the legislation, the implementation. They then, their cohorts, control the entry to the family courts. And looking upon it in a bigger sense, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Then we were familiar with feminism wanting equality. And there was certainly imbalances there in society. But technology, society moved on a lot, work-wise and everything else. So you have a situation in the UK where 90% of work can be done by either gender. Leave aside the building sites and infrastructure and all the rest, and defence, by and large. But the hardline gender vigilantes, which is what I call the toxic element of feminism, have discovered a wonderful vehicle, victim female. And this is really such a successful vehicle for them. It started off to an extent with the loot model from Minnesota, and then you had the respect model. And basically it's just a rehash of total bigotry. And the judges know that if they rule and is a risk taken, and the one tiny percentage of fathers does kill the child, the public opprobrium will be extraordinary. But when the reverse happens, it's virtually silent. For example, your opening comment there, Mike, was that more children are killed by the mothers than by the fathers. How many times have you heard any of these people or the media give this attention? Do you think Jess Phillips is going to read out the names of all the children, all the girls who've been killed by their mothers? No chance. Do you think that they're going to read out the 900 odd men a year, fathers, who top themselves, commit suicide because they are no longer allowed to see the children up against this vast structure? No chance. Right? Consider this in mind. The training in coercive and control, which I attended in 2015, given by Dr. Bianca Jackson, had a large photograph above the slides of a man shouting at a woman with his fist coming out of his mouth. Right? She did say, but she had a cough while saying it. Now, this training was for barristers, social workers, and solicitors, right? And domestic violence advocates. There's a joke in itself. And I got in as an honorary Welshman. Don't laugh, sorry. So I kept my mouth shut. And it was backed by the Family Law Bar Association and the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. And in this training, which is on our website, you can see it in my book as well. If a man commits suicide, he is coercive and controlling. Sorry, if a man talks about feeling so depressed he wants to commit suicide, he is coercive and controlling. At no stage can you not be guilty, because quite simply, there's huge money to be made out of the children's misery, and the one parent who's expendable by and large is dad. Easily booted out. So while that imbalance continues, why should it be changed unless extraordinary pressure comes in from outside? And the media is a major factor here, because the judges will go with the flow. A lot of them are weak people. It's well believed in legal circles that the barristers and all the rest in the family courts are the lowest level of legal professional. They're not able to earn a living in proper law, shall we say. So they go into the muckraking, which is family breakdown.
So how driven? Sorry. Just how driven do you think? I mean, most family lawyers, I believe, are women. I mean, how many do you think are viscerally driven by feminist ideology?
I would say viscerally driven is 20 to 30%, and I would say that another 50 or 60% just go along with that because it's an easier life. And there's a very few who, like Sarah Phillimore, and a very, very few prepare to stand up for children. But they're a minority, and they're constantly being attacked and trolled by the vicious mindset of the controlling element. In any sphere in life, a few people control, and most of the rest just follow. Yeah. Particularly where you have secret justice. Secret justice is natural injustice. So they have an open season to a large extent.
Of course. And apologies, Sally. Sorry, go on.
So we've got an anonymous attendee, and they have said, I am very pleased to hear you talk of how disabled a man is in family court because of the emotional shock and mental pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
This is something the MRM hardly talks about, and simply comments on how the MRM men's rights movement could expose this aspect more.
The men's rights movement is going nowhere in family courts. It's the bottom line there, because it is only concerned with the welfare of the child officially. But that is a vehicle that the MRM, in my opinion, has not successfully grasped. Now, there's lots of avenues outside for men as disadvantaged against, like that Hina Swan, the quotas and all the rest, okay? But I'm not in that battleground. I'm aware of it, but I'm not in that battleground. So I purely concerned with the welfare of the child as paramount, and how one parent is so often so totally disadvantaged. Now, sometimes mothers as well lose terribly in private family law proceedings, but a lot of the mothers who lose terribly in family law proceedings have gone to these local gender vigilante domestic violence agencies, has been heavily encouraged, embellished, and facilitated in making accusations that then a decent judge looks into. She can't back it up, and sometimes they lose residence because they're not allowed to let the father see their children. They're told if they do, they will not be getting any more support from their organization because the system owns her. And I've heard Kafkas tell mothers who want to withdraw allegations that if you do it, we will make a request of local services to look at your parenting of your child, because you made these allegations about this other parent. But they're completely ignoring the fact, of course, that their sisterhood was the ones who encouraged the allegations. So also, you see, society is naturally against men's rights. It's a wrong thing in life. But the men's rights, I have on occasions been accused of being a men's rights activist, which is a misrepresentation. But it's a joke that men looking for equal rights is considered a dirty, slanderous term. That is an absurd context, and it shows the widespread discrimination in society against half of society, which is no benefit of society moving on. I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole benefits of men to society and fathers to society. We haven't enough time for that. But there is no counter to that narrative, very little counter to that narrative. And it's only through forums such as this that there is an embryonic, and hopefully it can be developed and moved on, because the way I look at things like this forum here is that it's part of a library building process. And that hopefully others will take a look into what's going on, raise the head above the parapet, and stop being such sheep. And I apologize to sheep.
Can I just add on to that then? If the men's rights movement is not working in the right forum or in the right
context. I'm talking about it in the children's context.
Oh,
okay. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
It's going over there because fathers have no rights. Technically, neither does the mother. Right? But the rights are with the child. But within that is a huge avenue of abuse.
It's the impact on the campaigning, the raising of awareness, the self-lobbying, the lobbying in groups, that connectivity. Because in terms of, that's where, I would have asked, is that where the men's rights movement works to influence children's services, court services, family services in terms of children and families that are end up in court? It may not be a place for it in the court setting itself, but is there a place where it can influence what goes on in court or how court approaches these men?
Well, it's severely disadvantaged by the wrong gender complaining about their rights in a system which is pretend child-focused, and it's meant to be child-focused. Okay. So you see, rights go nowhere. The only people with rights are the children's rights of relationship with both parents, which is in European Convention on Human Rights and all the rest, and United Nations 9.3, 9.5. But they are so traduced and belittled, it's going nowhere. And generally speaking, in the family court arena, I mean, for example, we'd always tell the members who come to us, if ever you're asked, are you a member of Family Street Fathers, say no. Family Street Fathers is a very soft movement in that regard. Say no, because it'll be held against you. Because you will then be accused of your rights want to dominate the child's rights and abusing the mother. This is the narrative. Once a father says he knows his rights, or he demonstrates he's getting access to a vehicle, like Family Street Fathers, or maybe Dad's House, or perhaps Family Father for Justice, or whoever, he is forward at disadvantage.
Yes.
For example, sorry, Mike. For example, I've had a Kafka's guardian. I've taken a risk saying this, but tried to get an injunction against me being involved with Family Street Fathers years ago in my case.
Yes, I was just going to say, Vincent, that you and I have had a couple of conversations about the relaunch of our party in the spring, which basically we're going to rebrand ourselves as a pro-family and pro-children party. And for reasons, I mean, I won't take up time in this, but it's something that I articulate in my speech. Because it seems to me that we have to put the spotlight that there is no sympathy for men.
No.
So the fact that men suffer in this area, as in the all 25 areas next to me, we have to sort of show what I think people should instinctively know, but don't always, that denial of access to a parent is child abuse. It is.
Absolutely.
It is the most. It is the most, and the collateral damage includes the father and grandparents
and
so
all the women on his side of the family. The granny who may have often reared the children, babysat them for endless hours and all the like. Oh yeah.
I was. It's interesting you mention that, because I am contacted by 10 times more grandmothers and grandfathers. It might be 20 times. I hardly ever hear from grandfathers.
Same here. Yeah.
It's always the woman who is the emotional, sort of center of all these things. But I'd just like to recommend something. William Collins's The Empathy Gap.
A man I revere. Not many I say that about.
No, he's an absolute league of his own, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
The paperback in the UK retails for £25. He makes actually very little money on that, because it's a 675-page print-on-demand book. But we recently, my political party invested quite heavily in turning it into an ebook at very considerable cost. But it's now selling on Amazon for, I think it's £4.20. And there's like 1,100 or 1,000 hyperlinks to materials and papers.
Yeah. His research is awesome.
And chapter after chapter, I think there's 6 or 7 chapters around marriage, divorce, fatherlessness, and so on. It's an absolute tour de force. It's worth the money just for that section alone. So,
well, also in my own book, because I lack that rigorous intellectual capacity that I obviously lack it compared to the likes of William Collins. He was good enough to give me a chapter and a half on his book to use as I wished. Because there's no good me complaining about something, despite my 5 ombudsmen, 3 parliamentary. Who cares, really? Well, funny enough, European Parliament did. I needed that. We're talking about a subject now of more children being killed by mothers than by fathers, quite often because they don't want the children to be seeing the father. So they'll kill the children to hurt the father. This includes in a women's aid refuge itself. While they're campaigning to stop men seeing their children. I needed that total intellectual clarity to give my book real effect among the few professionals who may be minded to read it and to campaign for change. And I'm looking there at hopefully a few politicians on the right, because nobody in the left is going to do anything about this. Labour Party in Westminster is effectively the headquarters of Women's Aid. Jess Phillips is only the noisy one. There's far more dangerous ones than her.
I personally think, Vincent, that the Conservative Party is as corrupt.
It's gone that way, sadly. But there's a few backbenchers. There's a few new backbenchers, a couple of whom I know. And they may make small noise about it, but it's only going to be small noise. I mean, Philip Davis, for example, did a presentation, I think it was 2016, about the difference in prison sentences.
Yes.
And Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party at the time, dismissed him as being a raven misogynist or something, when the information he quoted was from Hansard, the House of Commons. Like, this is the automatic we're not talking about the Liberals because that's a waste of conversation.
Well, they also, as well as Jeremy Corbyn, demanded that the whip would be withdrawn from Philip.
Well, I'm not surprised. And now they're trying to determine what's a man and what's a woman. So we leave them to the delusions. Don't want to waste time. But it will not come from any current established political party. But there has to be a few people in these political parties who are further educated. Come back to what Sally said about MRM. But I'm more into the shared parenting, unless there's good reason why it shouldn't be taking place. And that's be only very few percentage of cases. That there will have to be more pressure put on a few political representatives brave enough to speak up in defense of children and stop this craven cowardice that's so endemic and the media-mouthed weasel words. I mean, for example, you look at the killings of innocent children recently by mothers. I haven't seen one victims commissioner make a comment demanding that women change. I haven't seen one desire behind these glamorous feminist barristers or anything else demanding to be vigils. They just want that bad news swept under the carpet. They go on with all men are violent, all women are victims. And unfortunately in society, it's not politically wise. Dominic Raab many years ago made his comments in some newspaper, I forget which it was, about some feminists, the most obnoxious bigots he's ever known or in society or whatever. He's never repeated or anything like it because very clearly he was obviously told, you want a political career, you shut up about that bandwagon.
Well, we had 3 Conservative MPs lined up to be, in fact, one of them we actually interviewed. The other, all 3 bailed on us without explanation. One of them in an email said many issues had been brought to his attention which troubled him. I asked him to name me one. And I never heard back. So yes, you're quite right. You know, any MP. The only reason that Philip Davis, he's now spoken at 3 conferences, the only reason that he can support men's and boys' issues is that he made it very clear in his maiden speech in 2005. He had zero ambition to be a minister. He wanted to just to be the best constituency MP. So he's kind of fireproof. But the others, I mean, he tells me 90% of MPs wish to become ministers because that's a big hike in salary and status and so on.
So one of the MPs that bailed out, I knew him, I had a conversation with him before he became an MP. I'm very sad to hear he's bailed out because I didn't think he would be influenced by pressures. I genuinely didn't think he would be. So I'm disappointed to hear that, but I'm not surprised, sadly.
Well, we interviewed Anne Widdecombe, the former cabinet minister, and I raised this issue. And she said, well, you know, your organization has a reputation for being controversial. And I thought, what a weasel word. Or she may not have used that word, but
yes,
you know.
Yes. I've been interviewed by Anne Widdecombe myself a few weeks ago. And the woman is one hell of an intellect. And I think that she is now seriously looking into the failings in the family court system and the gateway agencies. But what's videoed and what's presented, we've yet to see. So I always say, I want to see what the outcome is, what's done. But she's definitely no longer a minister or an MP. No. She's fireproof. So I feel that she may, but we await. But it is very, very barren area politically.
She has, however, you know, back in the 70s, she was a feminist. And she has swallowed, bless her, I love the woman to pieces. She's swallowed so many feminist narratives. For example, on domestic violence, that the majority of victims are, you know, women, blah, blah, blah. And time and again, she said, you're trying to rewrite history. I said, no, this is, anyway, that's a tangent that people probably don't need. Sally, is it your turn? I've rather lost where we are. Is it your turn?
No, we've got another question. I'm quite interested in this one myself, actually. It's from Sean, and he says, what do you think of the idea of no-fault divorce? Can you comment on its history and its impact?
I have no comment whatsoever. I couldn't give a damn about no-fault divorce because that's only about divorce. Divorce to me is just an administrative process. It's meaningless. It's just a canard, a convenience to disguise a systemic failings in the entry to the family courts for people who want to see their children.
There's some ideas floating around that the relationship within the divorce process would be better served if there could be an arbitrary service while the divorce proceedings are taken out, that there's almost there's something that goes on within a relationship that can plan for the structure of the children. I mean, some suggestions even are when somebody gets married, that they consider what would happen when children come in and keep to that agreement when they divorce. So this no-fault divorce seems to be quite a discussion that's going on at the moment.
Well, I was asked actually about this many years ago. Me one interview with the BBC, all 2 minutes of it. I didn't age too much in that 2 minutes. And I compared this to putting a new bonnet on an old wreck of a car that's got a blown motor, shattered differential, and a broken gearbox. That's all it is. It's cosmetic. Completely disguises the whole situation as regards children have a relation with both parents post-divorce or separation.
I know.
I look upon it as a distraction, a red herring.
Okay. So, Mike, do you want to do Douglas's question? Or
yes, indeed. Interesting question.
Yeah.
Vincent, the idea, this is from Douglas Wallace, the idea behind CAFCAS was to create an advisory body independent of the judiciary and the executive.
Yeah.
In reality, and I don't know of an exception in any nation, it has become its own beast. Given that judges have to rely on third-party investigation, should an advisory body be part of the judiciary, the executive, or the legislature?
The semantics of that I can't quite keep up with, but I can tell you very briefly. I had a lengthy conversation once with a judge, now retired, I won't mention his name, he became a very senior judge, who was one of the district judges responsible for CAFCAS being set up, which incidentally was set up on April Fool's Day 2001. And it used to be the court welfare officer, probation officers and all the like, with that mindset. The first thing he did was brought into the respect model, which is from Duluth. So the criminals are obviously male in its mindset. And to this day, it's domestic violence intervention projects that they refer to are for male perpetrators only, that none for females. So that gives you a clear clue as his mindset. It doesn't matter whether it's judicial, legislator, or anything else, that is his mindset. Now, this judge explained to me that one of the S's in CAFCAS he had been personally responsible for installing, which is support, Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service. Because they were aware that there's some parents have difficulties, some parents gambling problems, little bits of psychological problems and that. They just needed a bit of support. And there's money ring fence for that, and it wasn't too long till that was dumped. So I see CAFCAS as just a more legalistic version of Women's Aid. And I'm afraid, and I'm speaking from having 2 parliamentary ombudsman's investigations into them. I believe I'm the only one in the UK that has that. I'd love to meet someone who's got more than that. And some of the best CAFCAS officers I have met and worked with are ex-CAFCAS officers. And some of them are very good Mackenzies because they realize that the organization is quite absurd in its culture and its mindset. Having said that, Anthony Douglas, then CEO of CAFCAS, addressed a conference organized for Central London Branch of Family Fathers in 2017 on parental alienation. And he engaged with us extremely well, and I thank him for that. But they had in 2017 2% of their personnel, and they're the largest employer of social workers in the Western world, apparently. They 2% of those family court officers, family court advisors, FCAs they're called, had attended a webinar free by CAFCAS on parental alienation. John James demonstrated in 2019 at the Family Fathers AGM that 95% of them had attended a webinar on how to claim for expenses under the new improved system. So I'm afraid it doesn't matter what category you put them under, the culture is wrong. When the culture is wrong, the heading is irrelevant. Sorry if that offends people.
We had a couple of presentations last year, which we sort of read out anonymously, because there would have been legal consequences for the men involved.
Yeah.
But
I'm always walking that tightrope myself, I might add.
Yes. Well, one of them spoke. The most astonishing, I suppose, corruption is the only word really, in CAFCAS among social workers and teachers. Interestingly enough, women, women in those areas just absolutely driven by misandry to destroy men. And there's a thing, is it called MARAC? Where
multi-age risk assessment conference. Do you want me to expound on that for a moment?
Yes, yes, please do, Vincent. Yes,
well,
we have maybe 10 minutes left.
Okay, well, I'll not be 10. That's how I got introduced to this business. I was a primary care of 1, 2, and then 3 children for over 9 years. The mother's a high-flying professional, a full marks to her, and she suddenly decided in 2007 to get rid of me. And I decided I'm not going anywhere because I'm looking after the children. And I assumed that if it got to family courts, there'd be a sort of 50-50 outcome because I was a primary carer, but the children love her, she's the mother, so on. What they didn't know was that she had gone to the local domestic violence agency in Brent, which in constitution and practice will help female survivors of domestic abuse only. I got that on the Freedom of Information. And she went to the local domestic violence agency, which is a branch of Women's Aid called Brent Domestic Violence Advocacy Project. And they have their large spreadsheet to be filled out. And when she hadn't got enough information presented to get an automatic injunction against me ex parte without notice to me in the family court, they asked her, has she ever been known to abuse animals? So suddenly a phantom dog called, my family called him Shadow, raced to the rescue. And London Borough Brent Domestic Violence corporate strategy is that the perpetrator must not be informed of the accusations against them. Right? So totally secretive process. Then they conducted a MARIC, multi-agency risk assessment conference, which I was invited to. And this MARIC, the case conference controlled by MARIC, had about 8 professionals there, all colleagues of hers, but they will only bring their verdict, the Women's Aid verdict on the allegations to this MARIC. They won't bring the evidence. Okay? Very important distinction between the verdict and the evidence. So all I saw was the verdict, not the evidence. And based with the notes from that case conference, because social workers deemed me a danger to the children, because I hadn't seen the evidence. They had. The mother a week later got me injuncted from the family home on 5 court orders made against you. So the MARIC process is a total bogus justice and sham legality and a total affront to any form of justice. And I won't call it kangaroo court because it's an insult to kangaroos who deserve better.
Can I, sorry, a supplementary point from Douglas. I hear the problems with CAFCAS, but would have liked to hear Vincent's opinion on whether an advisory body should be part of the judiciary, the executive, or the legislature. And to put it another way, what would he replace CAFCAS with?
I'm not concerned what the heading is over CAFCAS. I would want CAFCAS and the family courts replaced with an inquisitorial system that's child-focused, and unless there's criminal allegations if found in the criminal courts, there should be a default position of between 35 to 50% moving on for both parents. The heading on it I do not care about because I see this as a red herring. But very convenient for the many professionals to hide behind their new improved system. That's all I see it as, sadly. There are good people in CAFCAS. There are good judges. There are good social workers, but they're a minority and they're in a rotten culture and a rotten system. It's rotten because of the culture. The system is rotten because of the culture.
Sally, over to you.
For one of my questions.
Yes, please.
My questions was how we can encourage governance to listen to family courts more.
To the outcome of family courts more.
Yeah.
Because they listen too often to the family courts representatives who are very politically skilled. It's very simple. Look at the difference between the outcomes for children in the UK and the outcomes for children in most of Europe, the EU nations, particularly Scandinavian nations, which I've written about in my book, courtesy of Nick Langford, who wrote the brilliant book, An Exercise in Absolute Futility. So if you read Exercise in Absolute Futility, and you read my book, which is a lowbrow version of that, based on my experience, my 5 ombudsmen, you would then have the knowledge to know what's wrong and hopefully the ability to correct the wrongs within the system, the inherent wrongs.
I recognise what you say around the, about there's too many people with too many fingers in the family's pie.
Absolutely. Children's misery is very lucrative for many professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I've never known any other area that's impacted by so many different opinions. And
there's no other area operating in secret, for there are so many opportunities for these agencies who come in and widen it to their benefit, and will only bring in those of similar mindset. That's why I always say secret justice is natural injustice.
I think most of the time that I spend working with dads and organisations is around coaching them in what to say and what to do and when to say no. Because saying yes to too many things, absolutely. I mean, for example, if you're told to, fathers automatically think I've got to go on a parenting course. They're going to want to know that I can parent my child. And I'm saying, do you think you need to parent your child? If you don't, then you say no. Yeah. Because as soon as you say yes, you've got another department in there.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have reviews, and it just becomes another bandwagon for the legal aid solicitors are the worst going in this business because they don't hear much, but they're in it because of their mindset. So your father can do a parenting course by all means. Then he will be accused that he only went in a parenting course because he wants to further abuse the mother, and he got good results from the parenting course because he's an abusive person. Why are you going there?
I know.
How is the ordinary man unrepresented going to defend himself against that?
Yeah.
He misses his children terribly. They miss him. He knows they miss him. But he also knows that within a few months they'll be alienated against him.
I know.
Which I often think is the way the system is designed to be so slow. It gives the alienating mother too much opportunity, too much power to alienate the children. And then your situation where the children won't see him. And the system, this is where I really curse it. The social services and Catholics will say, well, it's because of a conflict between the parents. When there's one parent causing all the problems, but it's transferred to conflict between the parents.
No, I know.
This is an awful bind for children and for the father.
The greatest advice I could ever give a dad or a mum, if the circumstances are flipped over, which is very rare, is that when you approach this service, you minimize the amount of opinions that you can have in that space. And if you know that you're a good dad and there's nothing that anybody can say about that, you simply say no. I'm not, you say yes to what you recognize as something you may work on, but you say an absolute no to the things that you know you don't need.
Well, you have a ridiculous situation where there's in every borough, particularly in the poorer boroughs, which is why they're kept poor, I might add, in my opinion. You have about 20, 30 agencies involved in this. All in secret.
Yeah, I know.
All government funded, local and national.
I know.
How is this ridiculous? You only have these gender vigilantes in a failed system. You only have that in third world countries where the government uses the paramilitaries to do its dirty extrajudicial killings and the like. You don't have this in a developed system.
No, I know.
The family court system in the UK is not a developed system, only insofar as it's a developed system for the welfare of the child too often means the welfare of the professionals at the expense of the child. This whole mindset has to be changed. And what sickens me is, no matter what review there is into any child killing, all we ever get is lessons will be learned and we have insufficient funding. What is the purpose of giving more funding to the people with the wrong culture and totally bigoted out view? It's uniquely disastrous.
I know.
By and large. Not totally, but by and large, it is uniquely disastrous.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. Definitely. So, Mike, do you have any other questions, or are you?
No, I'm good, Sally. We have maybe 2 minutes left. So if you've got another quick question and Vincent a quick answer, then we'll wrap up.
Okay. My question's a bit quirky, and it might throw a bit of a spanner, but Vince, what would you like me to ask you? What question would you like me to ask you? In other words, what would you like us to know?
My God, now you've really caught me on the hop.
I was kind of hoping you come in.
All right, I'll tell you what, I'm not saying it just for commercial reasons, because it's been a considerable financial loss for me. Just ask about my book. Okay.
I would actually like to know about your book. So I've only recently met you, but I do know a little bit about you because of social media and things like that. And I was very lucky to meet you in London. So one of the things that I did want to ask you in London, because I felt like at my time with you being cut short a bit, was what motivated you to write the book?
What got me into this business was I got a court order in 2007 that my children would be with me for a week, and I had permission to take them to Ireland, the family home, my parents' home. Social services helped the mother in breaking that court order, and asked the 3-year-old repeatedly how he felt about a court order. I mean, just think of that, all right? And I've been to primary care of these children for 9 years. And the oldest boy, who was then 9, started self-harming and other things while he wasn't allowed to see me. So that completely changed me as a person. Before that, I'd never had a sensible idea in my head of my life, and had no intentions of ever getting one. And then a few years later, I realized nobody's doing anything about this. When I started getting my ombudsman's investigations and what have you, I thought this has to be written about. And everybody told me they will shut you down, they will sue you, they will destroy you. As far as I'm concerned, I've already been destroyed. I've rebuilt myself to a large extent with great help from family and friends whom I'm always indebted to. And the purpose of my book is to educate those who want to know about this, to get away from the delusions and to lay open the bare. And it's not about my case per se, because why should anyone be reading about my case? Well, no one I should be reading about anyone else's case. It's about my journey to the 5 ombudsman's investigations, the Ofsted investigations, the stopping of a slush fund in Brent for toxic masculinity being taught in schools by outside agencies, things like that. This is what my book is about. And it was
I'm afraid, Vincent, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to draw it to a close.
Thank you anyway.
Thank you for a fascinating hour. I could listen to you for hours.
Yeah, me too.
And
You're sad.
The great thing about the speed that you speak at, Vincent, is that we get 2 hours worth of Q&A for the price of one. So thank you very much indeed to you, Vincent, and to you, Sally, for joining me. I'll have to end it there, and I look forward to seeing hopefully most of the same attendees in another hour.
Well, thanks to all for attending, and you too, everybody else as well. And best of luck, everybody.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye.